Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Wow, you know, it's really cold and dark in here, and I feel like spiders crawling on my face. But look, there's a giant mirror in front of me. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the most influential ufologist of them all?
Well, Tim, you are the master of the universe.
Indeed. Indeed I am. Even the magic mirror tells us that. And I'm sure our guests will tonight too, Jim. How are you?
I'm doing great, Tim. How about yourself? Do you have a good Thanksgiving?
Well, you know, I'm still stuffed with turkey. But I went out with my buds, my besties, as we call them here in New York. We went down to the Lower East Side, and we had Indian food, you know, spicy curry and all of that. And then my niece's daughter, Michelle, popped in and bought some turkey, a big drumstick, and some shell salad, which is my favorite. And, of course, I got all kinds of candies and cakes from our listeners. That's a lie. That's a lie, but you know, what the heck.
Well, I did. I thought you did too. Yes, of course.
Well, they must have sent them all to you. But we've been busy. We got a couple of new books out, and of course we've been mailing our catalog, and we're getting excited because the holiday is almost upon us, and Santa and Krampus will be coming down the chimney, and
that's right. Krampus, my favorite time of the year, when Krampus comes to take care of all the bad little boys and girls.
And he's going to leave
some.
And he's going to leave lots of cold for Donald Trump. Instead of the kids, yeah.
There you go. It's not a political show, so I'm not going to.
Well, we can have a good laugh over everybody here.
That's right.
We're totally ignorant of what's happening in the world, as everybody else, it seems. But Tim, enough with this idle chattering on our part. I'm sure we'll do enough during the show. Why don't you tell us who we're going to be speaking with this evening in the Exploring Bizarre KCOR Radio living room?
Why, my pleasure, Tim. As always, you know, we've got two fantastic guests tonight, and we have with us Susan Demeter-St.CLAIR. I said it right, I think, yes, and Mike Clelland. Now, both of these people, I should mention, have have incredible essays in a book that came out, I think, in May called UFOs: Reframing the Debate. And this is it's such a pleasure to have both of these people on the show tonight. Now, Susan is a professional research assistant, author, editor, and experimenter. Her research interests include individual and institutional responses to anomalies and exceptional human experiences, and how they interact and enact within groups and large institutions, such as the military, for example. Now, her life took her on the framework of UFO experience after an encounter in 1990, and she considers anomaly studies to be her true life's work. And I know that she's had some unusual experiences as well before her first UFO experience. So we'll definitely have to get her to talk about that as well. We have Mike Clelland. Now, Mike is an outdoorsman. In fact, he's not just an outdoorsman, he's an avid outdoorsman, illustrator and UFO researcher. He's written exclusively on the subject of alien abduction, synchronicities, and owls. It was his firsthand experiences with these elusive events that have been the foundation for this research. Now, his book, The Messengers, Owls, Synchronicity, and the UFO Abductee, is a collection of firsthand accounts where owls manifest in the highly charged moments that surround alien contact. So, Mike, Susan, thank you very much for being with us tonight on Exploring the Bizarre.
You know, I'm I'm really excited that Susan is with us because just by coincidence, and as Mike can tell you, there is no such thing as coincidence. It's all one synchronicity right after another. But what did we finish this week, Tim? We put the finishing touches. In fact, the book just came out yesterday. It's called Project Magnet.
I'm really
It's
excited
about
to read this one.
Yeah, it is about the life and research of a Canadian engineer by the name of Wilbur B. Smith, who actually now I would say that we've got to give Canada the dibs on this because as early as 1950 they had set up a group, kind of an unofficial, semi-official group. Called the Project Magnet. They had a little headquarters there in Shirley Bay, I think it was, and they actually had sightings of, or they actually picked up with their instruments, unidentified objects, and one of them apparently came close to the structure, but the day on which they had this experience, there was a cloud cover or a fog bank that came down, and they were unable to see the object, but they did detect it and feel its presence. Now, also, not only was this a project endorsed and I guess paid for by the Canadian government, I don't think it was a huge project. It only lasted, I think, 2 years. But they did get some very positive results. And Wilbur Smith was very interested in the propulsion system of how UFOs operated. And furthermore, he organized a group of UFO experiencers, mainly the contactees in those days who claimed that they had face-to-face encounters with the UFO beings. And he would ask them a series of questions and see what response that they would give him back without knowing what the other individuals as part of this survey were telling him, or writing down. And he found out that there was a pattern where most of these individuals, or a good percentage of them, were coming up with the same information. And later on in life, Wilbur himself claimed contact with UFO beings. He didn't speak about it a great deal, but we did have on Cameron Grant a couple of weeks ago who told about some of these experiences. He was privy to some information. So it's partly, at least, the Canadian show here this evening. And Susan, welcome to the program. So you had UFO experiences early on?
When I was 23, that was my first UFO experience. I guess I possibly had ones younger when I was a child, but I was 23 when I actually had a UFO experience with another witness who was my brother-in-law. And that sort of, being an adult, I was able to say yes. And with another witness, I'm actually experiencing something anomalous in the night sky. And that sort of, at that point, changed my sort of worldview. And kind of was what I call an initiation almost into this UFO community, into this UFO sort of frame of thinking. And that's sort of where my story began with UFOs. But don't keep us on pins and needles here. What exactly did you see, and did it get close? And did you have any sort of contact or communication with the object? Well, I'll start sort of like from the beginning, and it was late evening, and my brother-in-law and I were watching a show. I think it was Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, of all things, and it was November 4th, 1990, and it was getting really late. And at the time, I lived on this 10th floor of this condominium up on this hill that overlooked Lake Ontario and towards the nuclear power plant in Pickering. And it was getting late. The movie was starting to end. And I walked out towards this balcony I had with these huge sliding glass doors. And I had two very small children at the time. And I was going to go lock the door. And that was just the habit I was into every night. And when I looked through the glass, I saw this huge sort of red pulsing light. in the sky. And I had lived there for quite a long time at that point, and I had never seen such a thing before. And my first thought was that this is a reflection on the glass. It's something coming off the TV, because the TV was directly behind me. And I looked, and I looked at the glass again, and I started realizing, no, this is something outside. So I opened the sliding glass doors, and I went out, and I was looking at it for a few seconds, I guess, and just sort of things were going through my mind. What am I seeing? This huge, strange red thing pulsing in the sky near the nuclear plant. And I called my brother-in-law, and I said, you got to come out here and see this. What is this thing? So he comes out, and he was the first one to say, I think we're seeing a UFO. And I remember him sort of grabbing my arm, and I looked down, and I was getting all that goose flesh, and I was totally like in shock seeing this thing. And then it wasn't until a time later that I remembered, and I was able to confirm with him that I said during all of this, they know we can see them. And I had forgotten at that moment. It was actually a while later that I remembered it. And it was so strange and odd. And I still really don't know why I thought that, who they were, or why I verbalized that, but I did. And shortly after that, it seemed like this light, to me anyway, imploded in on itself and became very tiny and shot straight up into the sky. Now, we stayed up all night long. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did he. We just sat up. We talked about this. We were talking it out. What could this be? What could it not be? I remember looking at the time when it had disappeared towards the street that was running parallel to where the plant was and Lake Ontario. And I was thinking to myself, there was one lone car out there. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning. And I thought, this person had to have seen this. This thing was so huge. And I was looking the next day at the newspapers. I had the news on. And this was 1990, pre-internet days, so I didn't have the internet to just jump on and find a UFO group, and I had no concept of who I might contact. I already felt I can't call the police because there wasn't a crime that was committed, so I didn't know who to contact. So it was a few weeks later that I was at the library, and I got out a bunch of books on UFOs, and I found Dr. Hynek's book. And in the back cover, there was QFOS's address. So I wrote everything down, and I sent this letter off to Chicago and to QFOS. And I guess the address had changed since the time of the publication. I had no idea at this point that Dr. Hynek had passed away. And the letter a few weeks later came back to me undeliverable. And that's where it kind of sat for me for about 6 or 7 years until my kids got older. And I never put this out of my mind. Over the years, it just kind of was there. And then in the late 1990s, I actually started getting involved more with UFO groups. The internet was going then. I found MUFON. And I started investigating UFOs at that point for myself. Like, it never really left my mind. So
now, would you say the object seemed to implode on itself? Did you hear it? Was there any sound at all?
No, none at all. And that was one of the things that that had popped in my mind, is like, this is not a helicopter, this is not a plane, because it was pulsating, but it was almost stationary, and it was right near that plant. And then later on, I did find out that there were many sightings involving only just that nuclear power plant, but many.
Well, let's imagine that you're looking at the full moon. If you were to compare the object that you saw to the moon, how big would it be in comparison to the lunar body?
At a full moon, it was about probably comparable in size. It was quite large. It was very big. I didn't investigate it myself, but a MUFON did investigate that sighting that I had, but it was several years later that was sort of investigated. And I think the size, I forget the exact size now that it was estimated, but it was quite large. Like, in my mind, there was no way that other people couldn't have seen it.
But nobody did, as far as you know.
Nobody did, as far as I know, and I've had that sighting online since about 1990, and I've had people write to me saying that, I've seen things around the plant, and they've shared their own experiences, but none for that specific date.
Well, we've had numerous cases, and you probably realize this, where there could be 2 or 3 witnesses, out looking at the sky, and some people will see something, and other people will see nothing. I don't know. I mean, I remember a case up in Pine Bush, New York, about an hour and a half here from New York. Witnesses claimed that they were watching these giant crosses in the sky, and we were about 2 blocks away, and there's no way that these objects could have passed over us without us having seen them. I mean, if they were as big as the witnesses say that they were, but yet there's no indication that any of the witnesses were lying, because some of them even had photographic proof that they had seen something. No?
Well, sure. There was a massive case that happened, I think, about 2 or 3 days after. And it was same time frame, within the week, and it was in Montreal. And in this case, there was this large sort of spacecraft-like thing that people were describing that appeared downtown Montreal over a hotel. And there must have been at least 60, 70 witnesses, but all the witnesses seemed to be on the top of this hotel. There was some sort of party that was going on.
Oh, I've seen that. Actually, there's a TV documentary. What do you call it? Like a In Search Of. I think maybe it's on Netflix or somewhere now. And I never heard about that case myself, but it's a real good case by all means. Yeah.
Yeah, and you'd think that people but that's the thing. The people on this other side of the street, people that were on the street, none of these people saw this. Yet you had, and you should have had maybe hundreds of thousands of people, because this is downtown of a major urban center. It would be the same thing as if it appeared, over New York City. You would expect thousands upon thousands of witnesses. But no, it was very much concentrated to this group of people, about 60, 70 people on top of this hotel. And so I mean, it was there, but...
Well, there was even photographs taken.
Yes.
of that event. I remember when it happened.
Yeah, but this seems to be the case, like in all sorts of different paranormal type experience. It's also the case with haunted houses, where you can have maybe a room of 4 or 5 people, and maybe 2 people might see an apparition, and someone else might see a shadow, and then 2 other people will see nothing. So I mean, I don't know what that exactly tells us about the nature of the phenomena itself, or the various phenomena, but it is an interesting thing about it that, people do perceive things differently.
Well, since you brought up paranormal events, now you had what I guess would be called paranormal events when you were a child, am I right?
Yes, I did. I guess the first that I can remember was I was about 5 or 6 years old, and I had an experience where I saw this sort of little man, dwarf-like being, I guess. And at the time, I think because my only real concept of the paranormal or strange things was probably Scooby-Doo, I assumed that these little things were ghosts. And I had more than one experience with them. And later on, I thought to myself that they were, this is just childhood imagination. What happened during that period as a child is I would get quite frightened, and I was a very imaginative child, and I would have this wolf that would come in on the scene and sort of protect me, like come up to my bed. And the wolf would talk to me, and it would sort of scare these little men away. And then later on, as a younger adult, and I was getting into psychology, I kind of figured I was the wolf. I created this wolf to protect myself. And at that time, like I said, as a child, I thought that these were ghosts. But it wasn't until later, when I started getting into UFOs and getting into UFO experience, that I kind of considered, well, maybe these little dwarf-like men were not ghosts. Maybe they were related to UFOs, and now I'm sort of in a situation where I think maybe they're all somehow interconnected or interrelated through the paranormal experience or exceptional human experience. But yeah,
ghost UFOs. What difference does it make?
It's a label.
They're all the same, right? Exactly.
It's a descriptor.
Well, did these beings? I mean, were they like you were watching them? Were they watching you? I mean, were they obviously that they were there and knew you were there?
To me, they appeared like solid, actual sort of beings. But somewhere in my intuition, my heart, I knew that they weren't, and that other people weren't necessarily seeing them, and they did sort of unnerve me and frighten me. But they seemed to be like solid, like as if you would see an actual person. Like, and then that sort of presence, as if you know how when someone is standing beside you, you feel that someone is there, even if they're not touching you, you just sort of feel them in that sort of space. And that's how they appeared to me.
Well, did they try to interact with you? I guess is what I was trying to say.
Oh, they seemed to be aware of me. They didn't seem to be necessarily causing harm, but I was frightened of them. I would close my eyes. I would try to stay away. And then eventually I had an experience when my grandmother was staying with us. My parents had gone away to Europe or something. They were traveling. And I had this experience where this little being seemed to pop out and sit up on my bed and really scared me. And this wolf, like I said, appeared and just sort of chased them away. Like they would just literally like scatter away.
The wolf was like a psychic avatar almost.
Yes, and like I said, I thought it was an actual separate being. This protector, but then later on I sort of came to the idea that the wolf was me, that I was creating the wolf. So out of my own imagination it sort of popped up, and it was dealing with these little dwarfy things that, like I said, and they didn't cause me harm, but as a child, of course, I was frightened. I knew that they weren't really supposed to be part of the reality that I was living, but they were there.
Brad Steiger, he talks about how when he was a kid, he was lying in bed one night, and he was looking out of his window, and the way that his house was shaped, he could see the kitchen window where his parents were in there talking, and he said that there was a little man. He described it almost as like a fairy or brownie or a leprechaun type of creature that was standing on his tiptoes, peering into the window at his parents. So, I mean, you see that a lot, these kinds of experiences with children who then, later on will go on and have, UFO experiences, or vice versa. People who have UFO experiences will then start seeing these, for want of a better word, almost like supernatural entities coming out of their closet or, under their bed.
Yes, and it seems to be interconnected. I often I have had the experience as from the other side as a researcher, going and talking to people, and they'll be telling me about what seems like a real sort of nuts and bolts UFO type story. But when I meet with them in person, then they start relating, I grew up in a haunted house, or, I've had other experiences, or people within their family.
All right, we're going to have to interrupt you here because it's time to go to our bottom of the hour break. So we'll be back in just a few minutes on Exploring the Bizarre.
Now back to Exploring the Bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
And welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. Tonight we are talking about UFOs and kind of the strange, more stranger aspects about the whole phenomena. So, Tim, why don't we bring Mike Clelland into the conversation? He's been patiently waiting in the wings, and I think it's time to let him talk. What do you say?
Well, indeed, he's written there's some really good information, good books on synchronicities and UFOs and his own experiences, which go back, I guess, to his childhood.
Yeah, well, the thing I want to know, Mike, is that because I've seen a number of your previous books, about backpacking and things like that, and so what took you? I mean, have you always had an interest in UFOs and strange things, and just finally saw the opportunity, or just what's the situation that just got you into it?
I was the perfect age to have grown up right around the time of In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy, and there was a series of kind of early 70s television shows that really kind of like lit the fire for me. And in the Time Life series, they did a Time Life series. They did books on the paranormal and UFOs and ancient mysteries and such. So I never had much more than a cursory interest in it. And although similar to what Sue described, in my youth, I had a very clear UFO sighting. This happened at night, and I was with a friend, and There was something outside a window. It's interesting. She said that she thought it might have been a reflection from something behind them. And I have racked my brain trying to figure out whether it was a reflection of something behind me. And I have to say that no, it could not have been. We ran right up to the glass and looked outside, and there was something about this, like the size and the shape of a coffee can descending at this really odd, unusual way. Like it was too smooth. It was gliding too smooth to be a plane. Made this very kind of, I almost want to say like artificial kind of rotation. We watched it for about 30 seconds and poof, it was gone. And then both me and my friend, we ran downstairs. We were both 12 years old. This would have been 1974. And we both drew it. And we pretty much drew the identical thing. And I still have that drawing from being a little boy. I've since become a much more skilled illustrator and have redrawn it now. So that event allowed me as a 12-year-old boy to, when watching In Search Of, or, something, or reading a book by, I read Frank Edwards' book as a little boy, which was actually the first big fat book. It's called UFO Serious Business by Frank Edwards. And, and I kind of was like, I can't dismiss this stuff because I've seen my own thing. So that was kind of the foundation for me as a little boy, I guess.
So, what's I just have to ask before we go into this. What's been the reaction to people who were your followers with your, like your backpacking books and things like that, with this kind of like this new venture about UFOs? I mean, have you got any criticism, or people are like, yeah, we're glad to see you talking about this?
It's very strange. There's been absolutely close to zero crossover between the two. And so I have a handful of books out, mostly that were illustrations. I've got there's probably, when you count them out, there's probably over 20 books that I've done illustrations for. And all those books have an, mountaineering, backpacking, skiing, climbing theme. That was my bread and butter for, over a decade, was doing those kind of illustrations. That got all completely sidetracked when I fell into UFO research. But honestly, it doesn't cross over at all. Every once in a while, someone will say, "Are you the same Mike Clelland that did the cartoon ski book?" And I'm like, "Yep, that's me." And they're like, "It's really interesting. I have both those books." So it's more that the people who have the UFO books, have the backpacking books, will occasionally get a UFO book and then realize that I'm the same guy. So yeah, there's almost no crossover at all.
All right, so walk us through then. I mean, what was the catalyst then that started you on the path that eventually led to the book, The Messengers? The whole owls and synchronicity thing.
The catalyst was so along with that UFO sighting, I had a missing time experience when I was right around that same age. About 2 hours missing time in an unusual light in the nighttime sky. It felt like God flipped a light switch and turned the sky bright orange for 1 second, and click, turned it right back off. And then I got home, and mom and dad were mad at me, and like, "What are you mad at me for?" And I'm like, I'm home on time. And they're like, "You are not. It's 11:30 at night." And it wasn't. It should have been 9:30 at night. And then I had when I was 30, which was now, that's good grief, that's 25 years ago now. I had I woke up in the middle of the night and sat up in bed and looked out the window, and there were 5 gray aliens backlit by this really bright light in my yard. I'm saying it kind of whimsically now because I've told this story so many times, but it was pretty unsettling at the time, I have to say. And then I heard a voice in my head that said, "Now is the time to put your head on the pillow and shut down." And that's exactly what I did. And I should have panicked. I should have locked the doors. I should have done anything except calmly go back to sleep. The next morning, I dismissed it all as a dream and never even went outside to see if there were footprints in the snow. So those experiences were kind of simmering in my, they had been at the on the back burner. Kind of pulled them up towards the front burner by about 2006. That's when I was 45 years old or so. That's 10 years ago, 44 years ago, 44 years old. It was 10 or 11 years ago. And I went out camping for one night with a friend, an acquaintance, someone I really didn't know. I was living near Grand Teton National Park in Yellowstone. And, it's this kind of thing you do. You just go out in lovely weather. Let's spend a night in the mountains. Yeah, let's run out there. So you just take as little gear as you can and you hike fast and you get to a beautiful spot, sleep under the stars, and you turn around the next morning and come back. And it's just so rewarding. And I loved it. I love it. And I invited this friend. Her name was Kristen. As I said, I hardly knew her at all. I said, we should go out camping for one night. And we did. And she and I were sitting down and talking about, well, this is interesting because she was talking about something. And in the moment, I thought, this is really interesting. This is really powerful. I'm really impressed. Like, I didn't expect this. This is a stranger. I didn't expect her to be talking about something so powerful. And at that moment, an owl flew over us, and then another owl, and then a third owl. And for the next well over an hour, these owls flew above us, and the sun set, and the moon rose, and it was gorgeous. And we were laying down on our backs, looking up at the sky, just no shelter. It was a beautiful, calm night in the mountains. And these owls would like swoop right across our faces and blot the stars out for just 1 second. It was really magical. Few days and afterwards, we were like, wow, that was really great. And I said, listen, if I ever go camping again, I do this all the time, I'll just give you a call. And she said, you give me a call, please. So I called her a few days later, and the same thing happened. At sunset, 3 owls flew above us, landed near us. This time they invaded our personal space. Let me put it that way. They were right up next to us. They landed right up next to us. It felt like the universe was saying, like, hey, you dummy, like you didn't get the message the first time. Like, we're going to, so these, and I'm convinced, as silly as it sounds, I'm convinced it's the same 3 owls. We were in a completely different part of the mountains. Now, I never said it then. I'm saying it now. In the moment, both times, seeing those owls, I had a thought in my head as clear as a bell that said, this has something to do with the UFOs. So you asked what the catalyst was. After these events, I started looking into my own experiences. Those UFO experiences and the beings out the window and the missing time, all were just like a simmering pot on the stove. And at that point, the lid started to rattle. The boiling got a little more oppressive, and I had to deal with it. And so you asked the catalyst. The catalyst was seeing those owls. There's no UFOs in the story, but that was the catalyst. Now, I started an online blog where my initial posts were all about synchronicities. Mm-hmm. And I wrote that story that I just told you, the one with seeing the owls with this woman, Kristen. And then after I posted it, I got back to her and I said, listen, what were you talking about in that moment right before we saw the first owl on that first night? And she said, oh, I remember exactly what I was talking about. I was trying to give my most heartfelt definition of what God means to me. And this is like one of those details. I mean, Sue was sort of talking about this too. You get these details that there's this weird aspect to it that kind of are way out beyond the boundaries of what would be like a nuts and bolts experience. There's something more bizarre and more mystical going on. So that detail about, and I'm not like at all churchy or in any way, shape, or form, but I did realize and understand that this had something to do with something much, much more mystical right in the moment. In those 2 events, those 2 separate camping trips, 4 days apart, 3 owls each time, like pushed me off a cliff. I was suddenly confronted with so many synchronicities and so many owl sightings. I spent a few years like really questioning my sanity. This stuff was coming in so hard and so fast. And during that time, I started to do UFO research, and part of the research was on myself. And every person I would ask the same question. I'd say, hey, do you have any experiences with owls? And not 100%, obviously, but enough that there's a pattern. People would say, that's funny. No one has ever really asked me. And here's a weird story. And they would tell me these strange stories. And I started collecting these stories and documenting them and archiving them. And that eventually became the big fat book that The Messengers, with all the owl stories in it.
Which fantastic book, by the way, I should mention. Okay, for our listeners out there who may not have spent any time outdoors, how often does somebody actually see owls?
Oh, well, I mean, sure, people see owls all the time. I mean, they're very common birds. I mean, they're out there.
But okay, how often do you see them flying overhead? 3 at a time, like you said.
That's unusual.
Because
it's unusual to see them 3 at a time, 4 days in a row. And I did actually talk to an owl biologist one time, and I explained the story to him, and he actually kind of did the thing like I was the crazy uncle at the family, Thanksgiving dinner, like you could see him kind of backing away, like, who is this guy? Why is he telling me this mumbo jumbo when like this is simply not possible? And that's when I kind of, people will say like, oh my God, I was like driving down the road and I saw an owl in a tree branch. I'm like, well, yeah, that happens. Don't start a new religion over that one. But I do say that what I will say is that, do they happen at highly charged moments? Mm-hmm. What was going on right before your sighting? What was going on right after it? So oftentimes right after it, the people will say, oh, and then a UFO flew over the tree. And that's not uncommon. That is very common.
Well, I was just, the reason I asked that is because, I lived in, rural areas probably most of my life, and probably can count on one hand how many times I have, physically seen an owl. Now, naturally heard them plenty of times, but to see more than one at a time, or, like you said, under different situations, that is extremely rare.
Correct. Yeah, it is extremely rare. They do bunch up every once in a while, and it's it's not impossible, but yes, it is very rare. And the issue so for me, this whole story revolves around. I mean, I could dismiss it outright if it hadn't been for Kristen saying they appeared right when she mentioned her deepest beliefs about God. And I will also have to mention that I am like no fool in that voice in my head that said this has something to do with the UFOs. Like I pulled on that thread, right? And if there was nothing to do with the UFOs, I would have just pulled on the thread and there would have been nothing at the other end of it, right? I just would have gone, well, there's nothing showing up here. I don't have any. That's not what happened. I started pulling on that thread. I started asking people about owl experiences, and I am like flooded. Like I feel like the dam burst, and I'm just like, I have more weird owl and UFO stories than I know what to do with. And now, so there's one aspect of the issue, right? You talk to someone like Bud Hopkins or Dave Jacobs or any UFO researcher or abduction researcher, Yvonne Smith, you ask them, do you have any owl stories in your archives? And they'll say, oh, absolutely. We get them all the time. And what they describe is people seeing a 4-foot tall owl on the side of the road. Mm-hmm. They drive past this owl. It seems very unusual. They get home and they're 2 hours late. There's no such thing as a 4-foot tall owl. And that's what people are reporting. Under hypnosis.
Well, I think in Point Pleasant there was.
Yes, at the Mothman. Yeah. So then you start pulling on that thread. Yeah. And then that was actually what they tried to dismiss the Mothman sightings initially. The debunkers said, no, people were just seeing a great big owl. And that's interesting because, I mean, owls show up at night. They're spooky. It's kind of the part of any kind of scary ghost movie. And you can hear an owl hooting, or there'll be an owl off in the distance or something. So yeah, owls have that lore associated with them. Not even in mythology, which they certainly have that lore, but just in our pop culture. Little kids at Halloween, they thumbtack, little cardboard owls up onto the bulletin board at their, kindergarten class.
Well, if anybody's ever heard a screech owl in the middle of the night and have never heard a screech owl before, that'll certainly raise the hair on the back of your neck.
Yeah. And as well, a barred owl. Barred owls sound like they're the loudest.
Well, okay, Mike, but you've written about the owls and the synchronicities and all that, but what is your thinking on it? I mean, what do these are these owls, the occupants of UFOs taking on different? I mean, like what is going on here? Why the owls, and why do people see owls as opposed to leopards and tigers, or maybe they see those too, depending upon where you live.
There's so this is, you've asked the question that took me 400 pages to try to untangle, and at the end I basically say I don't know. But I'll do the best I can. So the owl I'm so this is, for me, like I went into this kind of in a nuts and bolts head frame, right? So I was kind of like stepped in, like I was like, there's metal spaceships out there and stuff. That all crumbled over the years of doing the research. And now what I basically did is I have to take my, you have to take my UFO researcher hat off, and I have to put my shaman hat on. Like I kind of have to pretend like I'm the guy lives in the teepee at the edge of the village. And if someone has a mystical experience, they come to the shaman and they seek help. So it seems to be more of a shamanistic kind of totem animal making an appearance for some reason, right? People are describing real owls. They say like okay, UFO flew overhead right beforehand. I saw an owl on a branch, and they describe the owl size.
Have they left behind physical evidence like feathers and stuff?
Actually, that's really. I mean, there's a few cases I have where people have found feathers. Yes. Yeah. So yes. So they certainly could be an apparition, but people are describing something very straightforward and very plain.
Now, do they all look identical? I mean, are these owls like doppelgangers, or could they be, I don't know what color, a brown and gray and white?
I've been trying to pull on those threads too. People describe the owls that are in their area. There's big owls and small owls. Some people see very tiny. There's a lot of very tiny owls that are super
all I
cute.
I can say is what a hoot.
Yes, I've heard it. So what happened? Yes, doing this, I have a lot of owl mugs now. People say, "Oh, I found this owl mug. I bought it for you." So I have on my shelf, I have a lot of owl mugs and a lot of owl knickknacks now, tchotchkes. So the answer is, there's something at play here where an archetypal animal, right? The owl is just seeped with mythology, and the mythology of the owl all throughout the ages is that they can travel to the other realms, right? So owls fly at night. Ancient man would have recognized that. That soon becomes a metaphor for traveling into the darkness, into other realms, into the land of the dead, into the land of the gods, into those other realms that we can't reach. So you follow that logic, the owls come back with a message. Now this is straight out of Harry Potter. Harry Potter has an owl that delivers the mail. It's perfect. So we have ancient mythologies, and we have a modern mythology in the form of Harry Potter, where an owl delivers the mail. It's a messenger. It's perfect. That's what I say when I said I heard a voice in my head. I said I got a message that said these owls have something to do with UFOs. So there's an ancient mythology in place, and I argue that those what created that ancient mythology were real experiences that sort of percolated into the collective, and then these mythologies welled up out of those real experiences. So the owl, it's not just UFOs. That's one of a highly charged things and that's the core of my research has been the UFO stuff, but owls show up around death. Owls show up around meditation. Owls show up around people taking psychedelic drugs like mushrooms. And so these are all kind of transformative experiences. Shamanic initiation, owls show up around. Oh, that's very, very common. You talk to people who go through want to become a shaman and go through the initiation process. Owls seem to show up in their lives. So you follow that logic. Is UFO contact a shamanic initiation? Is it a form of meditation? So I'm struggling and wrestling with all these questions, and I wish I could come up with a clean, tidy answer. And the best I can do is that there is some connection between owls and these highly charged experiences.
But with this kind of phenomena, there is no clean and tidy answers. We've, as a species, we've struggled for eons trying to find these clean and tidy answers, and they're not there. We're not answering. We're not asking the right questions, or I don't think we're capable of asking the right questions. At least not at this point. in our development. But once again, though, I mean, I find it interesting how we are seeing these extremely old, ancient mythologies coming forth again in taking on a modern veneer. The owls as a messenger somehow involved with the UFO phenomena. 300 years ago, people may attribute this as messages from from the angels or demons, depending on what how you looked at things. Now we're seeing it as some kind of connection with UFOs.
Absolutely. When I was working on the book, I would people would say, "So what are you working on?" And I'd have to size them up, I'd have to go like, "Oh my God, do I open the can of worms about UFOs?" So I would kind of say, I'm working on a book on mythology. I'm like, "Oh, that's interesting. What's it about?"
Yeah, that's easier to.
Yeah, you don't have to. You don't have to
I
like.
Would say.
So then I say I'm doing a book on owl mythology, and I can talk for go on and drone on and on for a long time about just the mythological aspects, and as I said, I argue that the same.
You got your eyes wide open on this thing.
Yeah, big, yeah. And I can peering into the darkness. Yes. So I basically argue that the same.
Here comes the Sandman, but we'll be back with this hootenanny in just a while.
Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe, exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Do you notice, Tim, that the show seems to get stranger every week?
I thought it was just me getting stranger every week.
We have had on such fabulous guests over, I guess now Peter, who does our YouTube version of the show, keeps track of these things, but we're up to about 115 or 117 programs
Something like that,
yeah. We're really we're knocking everybody else's socks off. Although I guess you can't say that these days. You never know when you'll get thrown off the air or something. I don't know.
That's right. We have to keep on the good side of the owner of the station.
Well, I'm sure we do. But Sue, I did have a question. Now you're up there in Canada. I had mentioned Wilbur Smith. Now, had you heard of him before? I mean, had you done any research on him or read any of the material that he put out?
Oh, yes. This is for Canada. This was already in the 1950s.
Early part.
That the government themselves were already looking into UFOs at that point. And this Wilbur Smith's research was in part funded in the beginning by the Canadian government. And they were looking for UFOs. He had like a sort of a UFO monitoring station in Shirley State.
It was a shack with a big antenna on the top because we have a photo of it in our book. But now, I had published, I think, 1975, a little book. I've been doing this since 1962, I think. Can you believe that? That would make me like 200 years old or something like that. But I've been doing this ever since I was a kid, And I think it would come along 1979. I put out a book by an amateur astronomer by the name of John Musgrave. It was something like critters and monsters or something, but it was a history of humanoid encounters in Canada, and it turns out now we included that in this book project, Magnet: The Objects in the Sky Are Not Stars, because it was a very good. It was the only thorough report or dossier on Canadian humanoid reports. I don't know, had probably 50 or 60 in there with illustrations, some by the witnesses. I believe they were, and it turns out that he had actually gotten a $6,000 grant to put this report together, which probably makes it, outside of the Condon report, which of course was a whitewash, one of the few instances where a government has given out any funding for UFO research. But I mean, how do you feel about UFO activity in Canada? I mean, do you think it's on the increase, or is it pretty steady, or it seems to have a wealth of information over the years? I mean, some of the reports that have come across our desk. We used to subscribe to a magazine called Saucer, Space, and Science, which was edited by Jean Duplantier, who actually I just spoke to on the phone. He just turned, I think, 92. And, of course, he's out of the publishing business. He hasn't put out an issue of the magazine in many decades, of course. But we used to get quite a bit of information on UFO sightings in Canada. They seem to be even more, let us use the political term, progressive, to describe their activity. I mean, do you find that the case, or?
Well, absolutely. We have a very rich history in UFO experience here in Canada, and I would say one of the better resources would be from UFO Research of Manitoba, which is Christopher Rakowski, who is also a contributor to Robbie Graham's book. He has been putting out for the last 25 years the annual Canadian UFO Survey, which takes a look at all the cases that he can gather from various different sources, whether it be the media, the military, actual witnesses, MUFON. I contribute cases when they come along to the survey, and they just sort of collate them as to what types of experiences they are, whether they seem to have a genuine anomaly or whether they're more probable something that's been misidentified. And this has been going on for over 25 years now. So it is a very good resource that you can access online. And it's got hundreds and hundreds of cases. So yeah, we do have a very rich history here of UFO.
Well, one of the things that I noticed, that there seemed to be quite a number of UFO sightings over bodies of water. Now, of course, we know Shag Harbor, but there have been other cases where UFOs have submerged themselves. And I remember there was a fellow by the name of Keel, not spelled like John Keel, but an elderly gentleman who wrote me, I don't know, an 8 or 9 or 10-page letter describing what he had seen, an object, a UFO disc-shaped craft, resting on the body of water, and humanoid figures of some type coming out, and I don't know if they waved to him or not. And then there was a whole series of sightings. I don't know if they're still going on or not, over Lake Ontario. In fact, I had a whole series of photographs. There was a fellow up in Canada by the name of Tom Gray, and he had invited me up, and we gave a little talk in his basement. They were full house. They were sitting on the stairs going up to the kitchen, which not very many people, but I mean, and they had a lot of sightings and photographs taken of UFOs over Lake Ontario. And I had a friend of mine, Harry Levelson, who was the UFO editor of Omni magazine when Bob Guccione owned it, and they refused to print the photographs because they were too. What's the word? Too much evidence that these things were real, and I guess that Guccione was trying to keep in tight with some of these science fiction writers like Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov, who are the biggest skeptics in the world when it comes to, or were. They're not in this world anymore, but they were the biggest skeptics going, and they actually. It got to the point where I found it kind of nauseating because they would try to turn the heads of anybody in the science fiction community. I mean, even fandom, by saying UFO believers were all crackpots and we were making it up and we were out to make money and so forth and so on, which is hardly the case, as Mike can probably tell you, but or anybody else that's been in this field for. Any length of time. In fact, I always remark on Philip K. Dick, who I just wrote a book about, and the Synchronicities, Mike. In fact, you're in there. I don't know if I sent you a copy.
You
but,
did, yes, you did.
Yeah,
Sure.
because we did the whole thing about Kenneth Arnold, which we might want to bring up if we have time in a little while. But, of course, Philip K. Dick was a well-known science fiction writer. He's been deceased now for, I think, 25 years or so. He wasn't quite that well known in 1974 or 75 when he went over to France and was at a press conference. And at the press conference, he started telling about how he thought we lived in a simulated universe and that we were part of some matrix, which is interesting because I just found out he never even owned a computer. Can you imagine that?
Oh, that was he died in the early 80s. Yeah.
Yeah, but he was still beating it like most writers in that area. He was still beating it out on a manual typewriter, And but anyway, you can see there's a clip of this. We've used it on our YouTube version of the show, and you can find it on YouTube itself, where he's giving this little a talk in front of this group there in France, and he's talking about some of his experiences and his thoughts on synchronicity and all, and they are looking at him in total gaga as if he is a creature from another planet. And what is he speaking of? Because they can only think of this in their wild, unfertile imagination. And, for no time at all. In fact, we've even had conferences and we would turn it over for an afternoon to the X-File people. And they would bring in a very small crowd because they didn't want to be, involved in a UFO meeting of any sort. And the people who were interested in UFOs and the paranormal left the room. And then when we came back in the room, all the X-File people disappeared. We never saw them for the rest of the weekend. So there's just no overlap in any of this, and they will not even consider the topic. So now, how many? Now you're a member, Sue, of MUFON?
No, I was very early on in the late 90s. I had met with MUFON. And at that time, I really wasn't, I didn't feel comfortable with them. I sort of struck out on my own. And I ended up actually kind of drifting more towards skepticism. And I joined a skeptics organization here in Toronto. And I started to sort of, I guess, question my own experience of 1990. And I started wondering, well, maybe, was it something natural? Did it really, happen sort of thing the way I remembered it to happen? And so I was with the skeptics for a couple of years, and which was good because I learned a lot from them as far as like magic and how
you cleansed your soul.
I felt that more what was happening was I was trying to kind of stay more into this reality or get a firmer grasp on reality as opposed to going farther down that rabbit hole. There's sort of a safety kind of in the idea of being in that sort of rational mindset. And then I had another experience in 2001 with a girlfriend also involving Lake Ontario. And this time it was much closer. It looked like a spaceship. And at that point, then I couldn't be a skeptic anymore. That was sort of the second, for me, initiation. Like I was going through these sort of situations or points in my life that sort of radically changed the direction I was going in. And in 2001, that happened again. And at that point, I could not deny the reality, whatever it is, of this experience.
A real space odyssey was happening, yeah?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about that experience, because you had some unusual feelings during that experience.
Yes, I actually had physical sort of symptoms that I myself and my girlfriend at the time, we had been doing this sort of a hike along Ajax, Ontario, which is sort of like this elevation, sort of cliffs above the lake. So you're higher up from the lake, but it's sort of trails that lead down towards the nuclear power plant. And we had been walking, and it was just starting to get dusk, and it was July 31st, 2001. And as we got down this part of the trail, I was looking out over the lake towards Oswego, New York, and I saw these sort of sparkles of light playing across the water. And at first I thought maybe this is a reflection off the buoys or like maybe sailboats or something. I didn't know. And then it kept going. And I started feeling sort of almost as if I was coming down with a migraine, because I had migraines in those days with the aura. And, you see those lights sort of in the corners of your eyes, and you're feeling this sort of electrical activity in your head. And I started feeling a little nauseated. And I said to my friend, I said, maybe we should start walking up back towards the car. I'm not feeling well. And then she said to me, I'm not really feeling well either. And she started describing similar symptoms. So we started walking up the path, and it was kind of a night that it was kind of threatening that a storm might break. So the weather wasn't really crummy, but it wasn't really nice either. So we were heading up towards the car, and all of a sudden, it was like I looked up at this point, and there was this huge spaceship, is all I can describe it. It looked very solid. At first, I thought it was triangular shape, but it was actually more of a diamond shape. I could tell this because there were these points of red light at each point. Then these columns of light descended down. We were sort of standing on the precipice on this cliff, looking down towards the lake. I could see this columns of light coming down. I could see them playing off the water. Again, I was in shock. My girlfriend was in shock. We were sort of trying to discount and think, like, is this really happening? Is this true? It was so bizarre. And then I started feeling really sort of scared at this point. It was very close. And it was almost as if this thing, it was like bobbing along, like as if a kite. I kind of describe it almost like a kite in an air current. That's what it sort of appeared to be doing. And then it just sort of shifted just slightly and vanished. And both of us were just we were so gobsmacked at this. And I started feeling really scared. And I still remember the feeling at that time that it was still there. I just couldn't see it. And I think that's what really scared me, is that it was there and we couldn't see it. So we ran for this parking lot and got in the car. And then as soon as I got home, about 20 minutes or so later, I just typed this all out, and I sent it off to a friend who was living in the area and was interested in UFOs. And because I couldn't talk to any of my skeptical friends at that point. But that really changed sort of the direction of my life, because I couldn't be a skeptic. I couldn't be one of the skeptics anymore, because at that point, I knew that these things they're real. They're true. Whatever they are.
I find
go ahead.
No, Mike, go ahead.
So I'm going to say it. This is what I confront all the time. People who say, well, I've had this experience, and then I had this other experience, and then I had this third experience, and then they just goes on and on and on. And I don't know anything about your experiences, and I'm listening here, and now I have to ask a question, and this is, I apologize for doing this right here on the but what's your sense? What's your sense? Do you feel you're an abductee?
I don't know. I don't have memories of being in a spaceship but I do feel that I've had some sort of interaction or communication, because I've had other strange experiences that may or may not be UFO related. I've had experiences with the little mini light balls in experiments that I've done that lead me to believe that I've had direct sort of communications or interactions with whatever the phenomena is. But I don't necessarily feel that I've had the classic sort of abductee experience.
Now,
at least not that I can recall.
Fair enough. You're saying what I have heard many times. What I'm sensing is that there's we have this sort of pop culture image of like UFO contact and abduction, right? You sort of watch late night TV documentaries, and people get, taken out of their beds with blue lights, and they get, stopped on lonely highways, and then they get, taken up into craft. So we have that as part of our psyche, and what I'm finding is those stories exist. They're out there, but they, in my opinion, are far outnumbered, almost word for word with what you just said. I ask people the same question all the time. Do you think you're an abductee? And they'll say, I don't know, and then they'll sort of say very much what you've said. So I'm at the point now where, like, I don't care like what UFO abduction means. It's sort of a drag that we're stuck with that term because there's no other term to but this sort of, I don't know what, like psychic mystical involvement with something other.
Yes.
And that is very common.
Yes, I would say so. It's if we strip away the language that surrounds this, because I mean, maybe for some people they describe a more religious experience, and there have been sort of connections made to visions of the Virgin Mary with UFO type experiences, and other sort of mystical sort of things. And I think that when you strip away that language and look at the base experience, there seems to be some sort of common points with all of them, and they are mystical.
And then they could, this is where Jeff Kripal, are you familiar with Jeff Kripal as a researcher at all?
Yes.
He frames this stuff beautifully in this form. Now, on one sense, I think to myself, well, I mean, I'm at the point now where I call myself an abductee, even though I have no memories of being on board a craft. I certainly have dreams that seem like they're on board a craft, but no direct memories. And I say that just because, like if you have a puzzle and it's on the kitchen table, right? And you've got all the puzzle pieces, but you're missing a few puzzle pieces. You still know it's a sailboat without having those few extra puzzle pieces. So I'm missing some puzzle pieces, but it feels like I still know. I'm pretty damn clear what it implies. But in my sense is maybe that all these people who are on the fence and kind of say what you said, like maybe they've had UFO contact experiences and it's just been erased. Or maybe there's a separate ladder that's like, rising out of the normal and up into the ether. One has, UFO contact at the top of the ladder, and the other one has something more ephemeral and more elusive. And I can't know. But I'm just saying that there's this stuff overlaps, and that this is where the owl. Now I'm finding that the owls seem to be showing up more where people are on this maybe category, where that's the people who are seeing the owls, not the people who are straight up UFO abductees.
Yeah. And the owl too, being a psychopomp, having that mythology is very interesting, that they are messengers of the gods between this world and the other realm. I find that very interesting as well. There is a
connection. There is certainly a connection between this world and the next, is Mike can tell you, because he's written about this, and we did a chapter in our book on what I call the June 24th Enigma, where over a dozen UFO researchers have passed away on what would be the anniversary of the first sighting by Kenneth Arnold, and that would include Frank Edwards, Jackie Gleason, Frank Scully. And just by coincidence, and I put that in quotes, Kenneth Arnold didn't believe that the UFOs that he saw were from outer space. He thought that they were actually coming here to carry the souls of the departed over to the next plane. So, I mean, doesn't it seem very strange that that would be part of the June 24th Enigma? And as Mike can tell you, Ken Arnold had numerous sightings. I mean, I'm not even sure. Was the one on June 24th was that his first sighting, or because I do know that he had quite a number of sightings after that.
Yeah, he had quite a number. He had, I think, growing up, he had sightings of orbs, and I think that was the initial sighting of UFOs. Now, this is something that I had to dig pretty deep, and there's a lot of. He was a busy guy. I mean, he did interviews and stuff, but he said, he never said it at the time, but he said it later, I think in the early 80s, that he had telepathic communication with those UFO, with those craft.
Well, we've had his granddaughter Chanel on a couple of times now. In fact, we usually invite her on around the anniversary of the sighting.
And now I'm gonna interject. This is something like Kenneth Arnold had a pet owl. Like that, I mean, that was what drew me into it, and we can talk about this more after the break. But
yes, we will.
That there's
everybody back into their spaceship.
go back to exploring the bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
All right, Tim, we have a question from Frank from Las Vegas, and this goes to our two guests tonight. And Frank wants to know, he says that there are two camps in ufology, that these beings are evil, and he says, and they are good. What is your guest's take on these experiences? Are they positive or negative, and why are they here? So, whoever wants to answer this first, go right ahead.
Okay, I can give you my version. I think that for some people, yes, they have very positive experiences. They're spiritually enlightened. They feel transformed in good and positive ways. There have been people over the years who have described healing, miracles surrounding what they feel is their experiences with this alien or alien other. And then you have other people who, yes, are, they have these horrible experiences that they're tortured almost. They're psychologically tortured. They're physically tortured. They're sexually abused by these beings or this experience, whatever you want to, subscribe to what is the true causation. And they suffer actual, post-traumatic stress because of it. I kind of tend to go with the sort of Jacques Vallée idea that whatever it is, it seems to really be indifferent. And some people are having good experiences. Some people are having bad experiences. I don't know why that is. But you can look in some cases at the sort of, if you look at the witness and you look at where they are in life and what they're going through, that may give us clues to the individuals. Also, if you look at sort of the locations and the culture, I do know, for instance, that you have some very frightening UFO cases in Brazil, as an example, that Jacques Vallée actually, he went in person. These people died. This was horrific, that they feel that the actual people were killed because of their UFO experiences, and they were. And then if you look at poltergeist cases, they too, in Brazil, tend to be particularly violent, that people have died because of their experiences, where you don't necessarily see that in other areas of the world. So if we start looking...
We did a book, Tim and I worked on it along with some other researchers, Amityville and Beyond. And it was kind of probably a mistitled book because there was only one chapter on Amityville. And the rest of it was contributions by different researchers, who we've had on the show, and some we haven't, about how there is a link between all this phenomena, and some of it does take on the form of like poltergeist phenomena. We had a case up in Oregon that I investigated back in the 1960s. We called it the crawling lights, because these things were seen first crawling across the lawn towards the house, and then several days later they were actually seen crawling up and down the walls inside the house. But it was the type of thing where there were no beams. It was just the lights itself crawling up and down. It wasn't like somebody was like shining a flashlight through the window. And we've had, there's also a case, Tim, remember the one in Black Forest, Colorado? The fellow, I think his name is Lee, who had all these experiences where faces were appearing in his mirror, and beams of light were shooting out of different rooms, and they actually photographed this inside and outside of the house as well. So there certainly is what I always say, that the same things that happen at a UFO landing site are likely to happen inside a UFO seance room or a haunted house.
Sure. And then as far as an agenda or why this is happening, the only thing I can say for certain, in my opinion, is that there seems to be some sort of, whether it's negative or positive, it has some sort of transformation effect on people. They seem to go through this transformation because of the experience. They come out from the other side of it changed in different ways. And that is the only thing I can think of. I can't really think of an agenda as to why. We probably will never know but it does seem to be almost indifferent because it can be positive, it can be negative.
You know, I see a name here that somehow I recognize, but I can't seem to place it. Dr. A.R.G. Owen?
Yes, he actually did some experiments in the 1970s in Toronto in regards to this creation of a ghost.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yes, they did a seance.
Philip, wasn't it Philip?
Yes, and they had some very interesting results in regards to what they did is they took a various group of people from the general public and they put them together over a period of months, and their purpose was to create sort of a fictional ghost story and more or less meditate on it and do a seance based around the fictional ghost to see if they could create poltergeist-like effects. And while they never had an apparition, what they did do is they got a lot of the raps and the knocking it was investigated and witnessed by several different people, including being filmed on television. And this is something that has always inspired me in regards to creating perhaps a UFO or creating mentally a gray alien. But I've wrestled with a lot of ethical questions in regards to that, but it is something that I am sort of working on.
Well, let's, Mike, do you have a comment on the question?
Well, I mean, so there's a fellow named Ray Hernandez who started an organization called FREE, F-R-E-E. I think it's actually been changed. The name has been changed. But he had a bunch.
We've had him on the show.
Oh, he's an amazing guy to talk with. Yeah. Oh, God. So he did statistical research and had folks from Harvard, statisticians, scientists, doing the research, and they talked to many thousands of people who claim the direct contact experience. And I think the number is roughly around 70 or 75% of the people say that their experiences are positive, and conversely 30 or 25% of the people say their experiences are negative. I'm doing this from my head, but somewhere in there's people who had neutral experiences, but that's kind of how it's been playing out. So then the good experiences outnumber the bad makes it good. That's not really how it, but if you've had a bad experience, whatever, hearing about a bunch of people with good experiences doesn't make your bad experience any better. But what I'm finding, and I had to kind of wrestle with this because I stepped into this owl research, trying to I'm going to remain neutral. This UFO experience is a bag of worms. It's got it good and bad. And what I found is that the people who are claiming these owl contact with UFOs and owls, and this is just going off a straight mood, right? I haven't gone through and created a spreadsheet and listed all the people's experiences, good and bad. My sense is that there's the majority of these owl experiences are very positive. Well, not very positive, but could be seen in a positive light. And Sue said something. This is a transformational experience, and people who have UFO contact. And she said it straight up earlier that her own experience, she had to reassess her belief system, and that's very common. So someone who sees a light in the sky that plays out like a UFO, that's one thing, and the people who see the little gray being standing in their bedroom, that's another thing. Both of these events are gonna force anyone to wrestle with the big questions. Like your junior high school science teacher is going to tell you reality is one way, and once you've had these experiences, you're going to have your own direct experience that it ain't that way at all. There's something much more multi-layered to all this. Well, so my sense is
my junior high science teacher flunked me anyway, so I couldn't care less, because I gave a report on astronomy, because I was into astronomy and all, and he said, "Oh, I must have copied it from the encyclopedia because I knew too many of the answers." Like somebody in junior high can't have a brain or intelligence or what have you. Oh.
Well, but yes, but he's also that. My point was being that he defined. There's a consensus how we're supposed to define reality in our culture.
Yeah, there is. Yes. Uh-huh.
And when you get down to the nitty gritty, I don't care whether you're doing poltergeist stuff or even Marian apparitions or something like that, you're going to find out very quickly that reality doesn't match what we're being told. But And yeah, so the owl would be the totem animal, like the symbolic symbol. I guess symbolic symbol's redundant, but like the symbol of the transformative experience. And I've really come to see it that way. And I've also sensed that even the people who have the good experiences, like, this stuff ain't easy. This stuff is hard, right? And there may be a good positive vibe in the moment, and there may be, after years of wrestling with it, a spiritual change to the positive.
Well, now, do you think certain people are picked, like, or were you chosen? We did a book, UFO Repeaters. The camera doesn't lie, where some people seem to have the uncanny ability. You give them a camera and they go out at night and pop. Here's unusual things that appear on the. I was going to say film. There is no such thing anymore. But appear, and there doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason for it. We have a fellow here in New York, Mark Brinkerhoff. He can aim his camera outside his living room window and photograph strange things in the sky. I mean, it just seems like some people, I was going to say chosen, but that might be too strong of a
I don't think it's too strong a word.
Well,
no,
maybe it isn't. Come to think of it, yeah. Just like,
and I know Mark Brinkerhoff too, and I mean, some of the images, a certain percentage of them are like, wow, I look at that thing and maybe it's just a little dot in the sky. I don't know. Others are very remarkable.
Well, the early ones, like he took in Brewster, New York, you can actually see what appeared to be a silhouette of somebody inside the port window in the craft.
And I will say that Mark Brinkerhoff is as radiant and loving. And
he is
as any person that's walking this earth right now.
I would agree. Yeah, we ran into him up in Pine Bush. They had a little mini a conference up there. I guess they do every year now. There must be about 12 UFO conventions, festivals. I guess that's the word for it now around the country. And of course. Probably Point Pleasant is the largest, and you got McMinnville and Exeter, New Hampshire, and now, what would you say, Mike, is can you name us maybe one or two cases in ufology that best are examples of what you feel is a good, solid case that brings in some of this paranormal aspect? I mean, what are your favorite cases that you look to?
Well, I'm sort of like I'm being swamped with my own cases, and I mean, it would be tough for me just to come up with something right off the top. Honestly, I'm more interested. Like, I almost like the book that I wrote. I kind of say it's a UFO book without any UFOs. That's not true, because there's definitely people who describe UFOs in it, and there's a handful of accounts where people point at things in the sky, and I recount those. But what I'm more interested in is this outlying aspect, this kind of mystical aspect, these kind of elusive things that show up in the research. And I mean, I could talk all night about some of these things, but there's one fellow who I'll try to make this quick, I guess, but he had a handful of experiences, and so he's had experiences that absolutely play out within the definition of UFO abduction and UFO contact. And like Sue, you ask him and he says, I don't know. I can't go there. Like but from an outsider listening to it, that's what it sounds like. So I can't speak for him. He went on a hike with his kids, and there was an owl in a tree, and it followed them while they were hiking on this trail. His kids were very young, and he said the kids loved it. They thought it was the coolest thing. This owl would fly along and would fly with them, and it kind of creeped him out. So he got home that night, and he read aloud from a book, and the book was called Say Boo, and it's a little kid's book, and it's about an owl it's about a ghost who it's coming on Halloween, and the ghost is going to scare people because it's Halloween, and that's what ghosts do on Halloween. It's going to say boo and scare people, but it just couldn't find his voice, and he couldn't say boo. And there's in the little kid's book, the ghost meets a cow, and the cow says moo, and he says moo. So then he meets an owl, and the owl says who, and he says who. So he can't quite say boo. And by the end of the book, he finds his voice, but he's reading aloud from this book that the kids picked the day they saw the owl. And this fellow's name is Ben. And there's a line in the book, and it says, and then Ben saw an owl up in a pine tree. And at that moment, the dog starts barking downstairs. So he runs downstairs and he opens the door. There's nothing out there. He feels impelled to look upward. And he looks up and there's an owl in the pine tree. Now, this guy's name is Ben. The last words he wrote or spoke aloud were, and then Ben looked up in the tall pine tree and saw an owl. That's exactly what happened. Now, this is like a string of synchronicities. In working with this in the book, there's a few more stories that play into this, but Ben has been struggling to find his voice, and he's basically saying, this is the same story. This is my story. I am struggling to find my voice to try to talk about this stuff. He sees that event, and as do I, as somehow orchestrated to like reinforce that he needs to speak aloud. The story is of a ghost named Ben trying to find his voice. He is confronted with an owl. This is someone who has UFO experiences that certainly play out like UFO contact experiences. And he has this experience with a little kid's book. So this is the kind of stuff that really lights a fire for me. This is the kind of stuff I want to explore and I want to pull on these threads.
Same with me. Absolutely.
There were a lot of people who have had these synchronicities. In fact, Raymond Fowler did a whole book on UFOs and synchronicities. And the book that I did about Philip K. Dick and my experiences runs about 440 pages. You could use it as a door stopper or something, And
I will also add that Raymond Fowler has owl right in his name.
Whoa. Okay.
That doesn't mean much. A lot of people have owl in there. I can point that out.
That's a good one, though.
Yeah,
and also Raymond Fowler has come out with his own UFO contact experiences. He's basically said straight up he's a UFO abductee.
So now, okay, all these synchronicities and so-called coincidences, the thing that I'm struggling with is there somebody that's organizing this? I mean, is there a matrix control system?
There sure seems to be, isn't there? I mean, I sure feel like there's like somebody, like it feels like we're in the what do you call it? Like in the laboratory, right? And there's a maze where the rats are in, right? And we are somehow specially bred rats where we don't have the ability to look up out of the maze, right? But they, whoever they might be, I see they're seen with their clipboards and they got their little white lab coats and they're looking into the maze. They can see us, but we cannot see them except very occasionally we'll get a glimpse of them.
John C. Lilly, who wrote the Eye of the Cyclone, I believe it was called. Sure. Now, he had, of course, he was the inventor, if that's the right word, of the flotation tank. And he had quite a number of synchronicities that almost seemed to have gained control of his life. And he thought, actually, that there was a synchronicity review board. And I'm not so sure that I would disagree with that, because these things do seem to be organized and persistent. And just like some people are UFO repeaters, I am a synchronicity repeater. And other people go through life and they don't seem to have, outside of thinking of somebody and they call on the phone or looking up and the clock says 1:11 or something like that, they seem to have no synchronicities of any consequence whatsoever. I don't know. It's just it's a wild and woolly and hairy subject, I guess.
And I think synchronicities are. I mean, so you go to a UFO convention, right? Or you sit in a room with the which I have done with the people who have UFO support group for folks who are experiencers or abductees or whatever word you want to use, and you ask the question, you pose the question, has anyone in this room, have you had experiences with synchronicities? It is like everyone in the room is like, it is, they say it happens 1,000 times a day. They're hit so hard, so endlessly, if following that logic, people who have UFO experiences have synchronicity. I remember I read this. I wrote an essay about synchronicity a while ago, and I kind of talked to a friend of mine and said, people who have UFO experiences have more synchronicities than Joe Normal. And she looked at me and she kind of rolled her eyes and she said, anyone on a spiritual path would have synchronicities. And I think that's true. I think someone like, someone meditating at a mountaintop is going to have more synchronicities than Joe Normal. So on that, you follow that logic, then UFO contact is a spiritual path.
Sure, and synchronicities are also considered they're magic. I mean, they are magic. You can actually create synchronicities, and I often sometimes speculate with some of the synchronicities, are we creating them from the future for ourselves? This is opening a whole other can of worms, but I do see the strong connection between UFO experience and synchronicity. I think it's worth exploring more.
Well, unfortunately, we are getting close to the end of the program, so I want to give our guests the opportunity to let our listeners know where they can find out more about him, new books, places you're going to be speaking maybe in the near future. So, Susan, let's go with you first. What's going on with you, and where can our listeners find out more about you?
Well, I'm currently in research mode for a book. And of course, please, check out Robbie Graham's book, UFOs Reframing the Debate, where I have the essay, and the other essays are great. And they give you a lot of food for thought. You can find out what I'm up to on SusanSt.CLAIR.com. And so that's Susan, S-T-CLAIR, CLAIR.com.
All right,
and then that gives a list of other things on there too, and links to stuff I've done and other places I've written for.
We have that. We also have that link on our website here at the KCOR Radio. So, and Mike, what about you? You've got a new book coming out real soon, don't you?
I hope it's real soon. Oh my gosh, it's been somehow these things just take forever. Yes, I'm working on a companion to the Owl book. Basically, I had so much stuff. I had leftover stuff that wouldn't fit in the Owl book, and it's going to be about a 250-page book that's coming out very soon with more owl stories where people are allowed to tell their experiences more completely and more fully. That was one of the heartbreaking things about doing this. I had an idea, like you want to present an idea, and you kind of cherry pick a tiny little fractal out of someone's overall grand experience, and then I just broke my heart that I couldn't tell people's stories more completely. That book, I hope, will be out within the next couple months.
Well, the full moon is or maybe it isn't a full moon. Well, anyway, I'm looking out the window and it looks like there's a full moon, but in my case, who really knows? Anyway, it's been another really interesting evening here at the KCOR, Exploring the Bizarre headquarters. And, of course, I want to thank our producer, Tina, and I want to thank Peter, who does our YouTube channel, Mr. UFO's Secret Files, Carol, and all the people who help us, and all our forthcoming and past guests, and most of all, Tim Swartz and Tim Beckley, who I know is listening, and our guest, our guest for the evening, and let's all go and have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you next week, same time, same channel. And look out for ghosts and UFOs and little green men.
Good night, all.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the Bizarre.